Are we live? Are
Yep,
we
we're
not
live.
live? Okay.
We are live.
I got another countdown. So today we're going to be talking about the tools of idiocy. So you want to talk about the definition of idiocy so we can kind of like set the pace here?
Yeah, let me pull that up really quick. Definition of idiocy. Uh-oh. So here's the problem. I have to figure out how to spell idiocy in order to
IDOICY.
IDOICY. That's it?
Hmm? Yep.
That seems wrong.
Yeah,
All
I hate
right.
when words look like that. You like fundamentally go after them and you realize, nope, that's actually the way it's spelled.
Yeah. Well, you know what? This might be very apropos for the conversation today. Just saying. So I'm gonna go
Yeah.
ahead and paste that so you can pronounce it idiocy. And
Hmm.
then the definition extremely stupid behavior. An example would be the idiocy of decimating rainforest. So
Yep.
there is your definition.
And there we go. And that's actually kind of an apropos definition, considering that Marwan and I are currently in discussions about having a special event in November after
Hmm.
elections are over about the ocean health. And
Mm.
we will. I'm working to get a special guest from the Cayman Islands on board, and I'm working on getting a couple of local specialists on board to talk about the health of the oceans and how that affects us on our day-to-day lives and how that's going to affect us in the near future.
Yeah, and I just want to say before you go into your prologue, uh, you know, we housing is a huge issue, but there are lots of issues that resilient ecosystems finds important, and so we are going to kind of shift direction so that we have a broad breadth of coverage of the issues that impact us. So and it should be a little refreshing change also. So I'm super excited for November. So yeah, stay tuned.
Yep. And so the end of my preamble, I was I was spending some time on Facebook this week, and there was a discussion that our esteemed board member Michael jumped into. Um, Columbia Bank had announced a job opening for a teller at, I believe it's $18 an hour. Michael asked a simple question of why not a living wage, and the conversation was off and running.
Mm.
And I normally don't weigh in on these because it never works out well in the long run. And so, but I kind of gave definitions of what a living wage is according to the MIT living wage calculator. I posted an article about cost of living and what it takes for people to live. And as you've heard for us to talk about before on this channel, it runs somewhere about 48,000, depending to 64,000, depending on where you live. And in Kitsap County, it's very quickly becoming unaffordable for most people who work here to live here.
Mhm.
And I've seen that happen in San Francisco. We've seen it happen in Seattle. Seen it happen in Silicon Valley. It's happened in New York. It's happened all over the country. So the question is, for me, how can we continence a living condition where the people who we depend on to work on here for us can't live here? But that's not the idiocy. That was the conversation about living wage and what a living wage means. But idiocy falls into that really quickly with the conversation of this a bank teller, and this was the question I asked, and I got kind of slammed on. So you go to the bank and you trust them to hold on to your money, and they need to trust the people that they employ to manage the money well and not to do anything idiotic around the money. And yet they don't pay them enough to live. Do you not see that there might be an issue here about how we think of things? And this was the first thing that started getting me thinking about idiocy. And I said, but how did we get to a point? And what are the tools in place that give people leave to act idiotically. How do we do this? Now, understand, I want to start this off with a very clear definition from me about what my beliefs are, because I think it's fair for you to understand what I believe. I think that all human beings start off, I mean, okay, I'm going to be general and I'll go a little deeper here. I think all human beings start off with an equal chance to excel and be smart and to work together and to live in a human way. I think that's ingrained in us. But what happens from the time we're born until the time we are where we are now changes all of that to changes all of that to where we have these problems in our thinking. Um, and part of that is due to what I call the tools of idiocy. Now, of course, in the very general statement, I believe everybody starts off equally. Of course, I'm counting the fact that you're born healthy, you don't have any mental damages, you are born into a situation where you have a chance. Not everybody is, and that's partly due to our use of idiocy. There are so many things that we don't look at. And there are so many things, so many questions we don't ask. How did we get here? We're looking at global extinction in the next 100 years, and we're not asking questions and we're not paying attention. What excuse is there for that? And the only thing I can say is we have tools that help us develop into acts of idiocy. And so let's discuss what those tools are. I mean, and I'm not going to make Marwan comment on this, but I got to tell you, I try really hard to be non-judgmental. I try really hard to work with people, and I'm pretty darn good at it. But there are multiple times a day I look at somebody, usually driving or posting on Facebook, and go, "Oh God, what an idiot!" Um, and then I pull myself back and go, "I don't know all of the things that are going on with that person to be where they are now." Um, and we could certainly digress this whole conversation into acts of idiocy that we all see on a daily basis. But let's not. Let's talk about the tools of idiocy. And we've talked about our culture as a framework for a social contract that's broken. And part of what we've done is given ourselves permission to do dumb things. And as we learn better, we are supposed to change our behavior based on new information. But we don't seem to do that. We certainly don't seem to do it fast enough. And I'm going to open the door right now and get ready for the flood. Let's start with a conversation about education. And again, I'll start off with saying, and as Sean said earlier in a previous version of this, I think teachers are the saving grace of education. But I do not think all teachers are equal in their ability to help educate people. And I don't think they're equal in their ability to educate people, given that the system they work in is broken and horribly flawed. And I will start this off with when I was in high school, there was very little distance between my person and the principal of the school. And that's not because I was in trouble all the time. Okay. There was everybody from the vice principal down taught classes. The principal was very accessible. There wasn't a lot of bureaucracy. There weren't layers and layers and layers of people on top of the people who ran the school and the school board. It was a whole lot slimmer. And we had people, I think 28% of our class went to Ivy League schools. We had an enormous amount of people that were getting 4.0s. We had artists. We had people who became attorneys, lawyers, some brilliant people in our school. And that's not because we had a whole bunch of bureaucrats on top of us managing the money and managing the system that we had great education. And I will tell you, to be really honest and transparent, that I was involved in an experimental schooling process in the state of California done in the 60s and 70s.
What was it called?
And I don't remember what the name of it was, but it ended shortly after I graduated and went back to more traditional school.
That
But
explains too much.
yeah, we learned a lot um, in a very hands-on way. Um, my first day of high school, being young and scared to death, I went to my homeroom class and Abraham Lincoln walked in. This would be my homeroom teacher and my world history teacher, Roger Weiss, came in dressed as Abraham Lincoln with the full beard, top hat, and the beard was his, by the way, top hat, tall, thin, black suit on. And he got up to the front of the class and said, "Hello, my name is Roger Weiss. I will be your homeroom teacher and your teacher for world history." And that was my first day of school, my first hour, my first day of school. And then the world history class happened, and he basically said, "Your final exam is entirely up to you. It will be a final project. It has to be something that you are passionate about that defines the history of the world. And you have to reflect it in the history of the world." And we had an amazing last 2 weeks of school as people presented their projects. And to show you the difference between what's going on now and at that time, uh, where I grew up was near the beach. And the class met me on a Saturday morning at the beach, and I had built a little diorama model of an undersea city. And I talked about my presentation part of the class was talking about the history of undersea exploration around the world, and then took them out into the water and showed them the diorama and explained about ocean life, which will go back to our conversation coming up next month, and my love of the oceans. Um, so I had a unique educational experience, but that puts me in a position to look dispassionately at the educational experience we have today and understand why it's failing our kids. But more importantly, as the tools of idiocy, is we teach people. I don't even know if the word teach is proper. We indoctrinate people into not asking questions and tell them that the answers are all out there and somebody has the answer. And that is part and parcel of how we ended up where we are now. I've also explained in other shows that our education system was developed in part by the drive of several industrialists to create workers who didn't ask questions but knew enough to get the job done. Mm-hmm. And that did not suit us in a long-term look. Matter of fact, 150 years after that happened, we are in a place where we are in a crisis of innovation. We are in a crisis, and everybody talks about STEM. A great idea, but where's the creativity in that? We have pulled creativity out of school. We don't think it's important. We've categorized everything into silos and are expecting people to create and solve problems. But we don't give them the tools to solve problems. We do exactly the opposite. We give them reasons not to ask questions, not to look beyond the answers they were given initially. And that is a huge issue in how we got to where we are now. And I am going to talk a little bit about acts of idiocy. It boggles my mind, and I see this frequently because I drive a lot, that people think it's okay to text and drive. And I can tell you who's doing it because I'm driving along and they suddenly swerve over into the side margin and then come back into the road. They slow down way slower than the speed limit, and they think this is okay and that they're doing just fine. And then they have some innate ability to be able to handle a multi-thousand-pound vehicle at speed and be distracted by texting with somebody. And this shows a lack of thought that is astounding. And that's what we're dealing with. And Marwan and I work daily to reach out to people, to get them to engage with each other, to ask questions, to learn, to get more perspective, to get tools to change the world, starting with the neighborhood, so that we can all do better, all of us. And I got to tell you, we've been astoundingly successful. If success means the sound of crickets while we talk to ourselves, and it's disheartening, but we're going to keep at it because we don't have another choice, and we
Yeah.
need you to step up and join us and start having these conversations so we can get past the tools of idiocy into tools of salvation. Did that sound very religious? I didn't mean it to. Um,
Either that or cultish.
but
You got some
yeah,
Kool-Aid for us?
so I was actually kind of considering serving Kool Aid at the workshops.
Oh, man. Yeah,
But
would be pretty interesting.
so let's talk about it. I mean, let's explore the tools of idiocy. Let's explore how to get by that into a place where we can come together and ask the next question. I know Marwan's holding himself back because I've just opened the door to a major ass kicking for me from a
Well,
lot of people.
the, as you were speaking and talking about your childhood experience, some of the questions that I have for you and some of my thoughts are, when you were in school, definitely things were a lot different, right? And one of those things was the population, right? I think of class sizes,
Absolutely.
which is when you think about the schools in Port Orchard, and you've got 1,100 kids or however many children they have out there, teacher to student ratios are just way out of whack, right? If you're at about 15 to 16 kids per teacher, you're doing fantastic, but you've got 40 kids in a room. And so,
We
you're really just kind of manufacturing education at that point, right? You're not able to, work with each person. So the kids that accelerate are bored, right? Which is usually indicative of you seeing some behavior issues develop because they're bored, right? They're not being challenged. You're losing the kids that need more help, right? And you're not catering to their learning styles and some of their limitations and challenges, and so you kind of teach into the middle, and it is just not really great for anyone. And we're looking at literacy rates
one
and
size
everything else decline.
one size fits none.
Oh, right,
It's kind of yeah,
absolutely.
is how it goes. And to fill in some of the gaps on my story is my school had 3,700 people,
Mm,
and it was considered a fairly small school.
okay.
Um, we had
Four
probably
grades,
like, huh?
four
Um,
grades, nine through 12. Did you have a freshman high school?
freshman, yeah, it was basically freshman through senior.
Got you, because that's
Um,
different now, Mark. Like there are some high
yeah,
schools that starting at
or
10th grade, and it's so bizarre. It seems so weird.
yeah, so we had that average class size was 24, 25 people per student, but
Oh.
the teachers had more resources
Mm-hmm.
and more freedom, and we had special classes for people who were accelerating, and they could go as far as they wanted to go, and they weren't being forced to be in a class that didn't meet their needs. But we were also asked a question. One of my favorite stories is the chemistry class, and the teacher had a midterm. In the midterm, he brought in a whole bunch of ice cream machines, the old hand crank ones,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "Make an ice cream that's edible, and we will grade based on that."
Mm.
So he brought in all kinds of stuff from a list that we would create, and we made ice cream. If you don't think ice cream is an experiment in chemistry, you're wrong. The whole process of ice and rock salt and the cream freezing and the movement and adding things and making it work, that it changes state. It does. I mean, it's how it works. It's how we learned things. It was hands on. Um, we were allowed to experiment, allowed to think, allowed to ask questions, and given resources to address those things. And we spend exponentially more now for exponentially less.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the problem is that we're still trying to create workers instead of trying to lift people to their highest capability. We also teach things in a manner that is so boring and uninspiring as to make people crazy. I don't know if you remember trying to read one of the history books from high school and junior high school, but oh my God, could anything be written worse? You have this juicy living thing, all this wonderful history, and it's written in such a way that you just don't want to read anymore.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I'll tell you, you're I won't say considerably older than I am, but we're definitely in different
Significantly, yeah.
generations. And, you know, I had some, similar experiences. And this is speaking from someone who didn't even go to high school, right? I went to ninth grade, that was it. But in my elementary school, right, I was in, a course set that was called Horizon. So you didn't skip a grade, but you were in accelerated courses. So we would ride the bus with the regular kids, right? We were the nerds. But like I learned how to play chess in the third grade. That was taught in class, right? We were dissecting lamb hearts and eating the lamb hearts, so we were having different experiences that way in elementary. So, it definitely resonates with what you're saying. At the same time, we look at the poverty that exists in so many different areas in our country. And, students not having textbooks, not having computers and the resources, teachers buying, supplies out of their own pocket. I did that teaching at Olympic College, right?
Mhm.
And so then you're operating from a deficit. So I'll speak for myself. I went to Montessori. When I was in what is that, preschool? I
Mhm.
definitely accelerated. Right. My dad was big on education, being an educator, and so my educational experience was very different and atypical than a normal student. At the same time, you know. We were looking capitalism and outsourcing has been really horrible, right? And that's the one thing that we really can't outsource is our education. And I don't know, maybe that's kind of the problem.
But we have corporations, not teachers, are writing the
Well,
tests and the
yeah, I guess that
textbooks.
is true, right? So they are building our curriculum and then we're just spreading it out, right? Common Core and
Yeah.
all this other junk that I'm not a big fan of.
So let's ask the next question that's the elephant in the room. Where does all the money go that gets thrown at education these days? If it's not going to the classroom and it's not buying resources, where the heck does all the money go?
Maybe some of it is labor
Some
and
of it, but
union.
teachers will tell you they're underpaid, and for the
That they
most
are.
part, I agree with them. They are.
I absolutely agree. We have
Yeah.
a flip system here. I think our teachers should be paid like our rock stars.
Let's go back to the fact that there was very little distance between myself and the principal and the parents. There wasn't layers and layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy in between everything, and therefore things got done. And we didn't have people running around, trying to trying to prove their jobs or whatever these people are. I have no idea what these people do. If you're not an educator, you're not an administrator at the school, what the heck are you doing and why are you getting paid?
Mm.
So, yeah, so labor might be part of it, but do we need those jobs? We're outsourcing educational development to corporations, not teachers. We ignore science of brain development and child development for process. We try and fit everybody into the same mold. Could we not do better if we took some of the bureaucracy away, put some more freedom back into the classroom, and taught teachers about science and appropriateness and flexibility and how to deal with situations that are outside of the comfort zone, where and treat people like people and meet them where they are instead of trying to throw something at them that doesn't work for anybody.
So I hear what you're saying, but I think the problem isn't so much with the education system as much as it is the forces that are pushing on it, right? So let's say we wanted to change that. How do we even begin to change the education system when our politics and everything else are pushing that this is how things should be, right? Like we don't need to have summer break anymore. We don't need to have the kids go out and pick the crops, right? We should have school all year long, right? We're the richest nation in the history of humanity, and yet and still we're at the bottom percentile in so many different areas like math and science and everything else. Why are we taking breaks in the summer? Why isn't school, in
To keep the
alignment with
rebellion from
the
happening.
parents? Huh? Why isn't school, aligned with parents' jobs, right? If a typical workday is 9 to 5, why are kids getting out at 3?
So here's a couple. Man, you just gave me like three different avenues. So I'm going to
Sure.
address them in order.
Go
The
ahead.
first one is, how do we change the system? Well, we've been talking about that for 35 episodes. By the way, today is number 35.
Oh, is
So
it? Okay.
it is. So we've been talking about that. We start with the neighborhoods. We determine what human needs are. We develop grassroots networks. We change locally and then grow to changing nationally through state, county, state, and national politics. We the people determine what we need. The trouble is, we really had no say in how education was developed. And the only say we have is what the party system and the school system that we have now tells us we have a say in. And I think that we need to talk about what we really expected. But in order to do that, I'm going to skip to the second subject, which is a year round school system to be matched by um, our working schedule. So um, I got two things to say here. One is, should we be working 9 to 5, 50 weeks a year? And is that efficient for us? Or are we just place markers? Oh, God, this is a much larger conversation. I worked in corporations, and I realized quickly that people were more often place markers than actually useful. We were pawns in a stock manipulation that could be laid off if it got bad, that could be hired if it was good. It was, and most of the people there weren't doing what I would consider a useful job. Now, that's not saying that people are useless. I'm just saying that they do the best they can with what they have and what the corporations offer them, but they're so focused on process that they're not really focused on innovation. And they're so focused on stock performance that they're not really focused on product, which is so far and away from how corporations and businesses were originally started. And none of it has anything to do with relationship. And that's something that needs to be addressed as well. And actually, Stephanie and I had a large conversation about that yesterday, um, about the missing focus of relationship with people. Um, the other thing is that the second part of that is that I think that parents, because they are working so much to try and pay the bills, going back to the $18 an hour argument and the living wage argument, that school becomes a babysitting function as much as it is a function of education. And is it really a teacher's job to babysit your child when you can't be with them?
I'm kind of puzzled now. I mean, we are you saying that we should homeschool our children?
We did. We homeschooled Kira until she was 16 and chose to go to high school. And when she did go to high school, she was pulling 4.0.
I don't think everyone has that capacity.
Probably not, because we're all trying to survive working one or two jobs to barely get by. Let's go back to the 46% of people that are one paycheck away from homelessness. That's over 150 million people in this country. We all know people that are in that boat, even though they may or may not say anything about it. The way we run our country, going back to the theme here, the way we run our country is run on the tools of idiocy. We
I'm trying
can't,
hard right now, Mark.
yeah,
I'm just like, the topic is idiocy, and I'm just thinking about all Americans homeschooling their children.
and
Uh,
homeschooling does a wide range of things, and I agree with you. Not all of it is good, um,
oh man.
but there are also lots of support groups around it, and a lot of the ones we were with were actually really good. Um, Matter of fact, one year we did a not back to school camp where we all went up to Lake Crescent or Crescent Lake, I don't know, up in near Port Angeles, and we had 3 days there as a not back to school camp where we did educational stuff and had fun and cooked together and did some great things. But I don't think that homeschooling is the answer. I think redoing the education system to be more flexible, to actually teach, to actually pay attention to science of brain development, and to educate parents on this as well, because we have been sold a bill of goods about what our understanding is. I mean, the ABC Mouse commercials, I always just look at it. My child was learned to read at 3. And yet, brain development science says that they really can't understand, they can mimic, but they really can't understand complex, their brain isn't ready to handle complex issues for another 5 years. So, should they be reading at 3? I mean, we think that that's a great thing, but are we doing damage to them? Are we not working with them? I mean, there's a lot of science out there that we just, because of corporate greed or corporate profit, I won't call it greed, I'll call it corporate profits, we ignore it. For process, we ignore it. And I think it's time that we start paying attention to humanity and not necessarily profits. And it's going to be hard to do because people are struggling and we require the paycheck to live.
Well, what I would say is, I don't know how much I agree with your last statement, but I do believe that the
It's okay not to agree. That's
but
quite
but
honestly, that's how we figure things out.
it is. But the part with corporations that I do agree with is, in your other statement is, school is designed to breed workers, right?
Mhm.
So if we're going to change that, then we would have to get corporations out of schools in the sense of not just creating the curriculum and whatnot, but just not churning out, you know, um, mindless automatons that do the bidding. We do need some creative thinking, and we see that we are having deficits in pilots and teachers and nurses and doctors and all these
And
things
blue
that we
collar
need,
workers.
but we're not. Yeah, yeah, blue collar. Our infrastructure, our bridges are falling apart. We need our fiber optic cable installed, nationwide. I don't know why we don't have more high speed rail in this country, like many other countries. So there's a lot that we need to do, but we haven't turned the corner to say, hey, you know what? Instead of outsourcing that and bringing in the big brains from other countries, we're gonna be the big brains here. So I mean,
Yep.
there's a huge tectonic shift in education that would have to happen, but I think that's going to happen outside of academia first.
Before you can solve a problem, first you got to admit you have one.
Facts, facts.
And we have a path to start solving the problems. We just need to get people on board to start having those hard discussions and start building the grassroots networks, to start coming to commonalities and agreements, and to find a different way to go. The only way we're going to come to agreement is to be willing to face that we might not agree,
So let me
and
ask
then
you
work
this,
until
Mark.
we figure out what we can.
Let me ask you this. As a parent, right? And I feel like Layla is an exception to this conversation, right? She is on a great trajectory. But let's say that I was a parent that had a child who was struggling, disenfranchised with their educational experience. I'm disenfranchised with the educational experience because my experience wasn't good. Uh, but I'm like, okay, I listened to what Mark and Marwan were talking about, and I've had the wool covered pulled from my eyes for a hot second, and I'm taking a trip 10 or 15 years into the future and looking at my 20-year-old son or daughter and saying, what does that future look like for them based on the education that they're receiving today and through their high school and maybe even college if that's in the cards for them. What can they do?
Okay, so here's, and I'm going to throw this one out there. If we actually started, if a miracle happened and you and I were able to wave our magic wands and change all of the education system,
Mhm.
and suddenly we had thinking, creative people coming out that solved problems, and they went into the job force and they were trying to get a job in a corporation or working forward, they wouldn't be able to get past HR because HR is not looking for the creative, smart person. They're looking for the person who will do the job, a very specific, narrow silo that they want to put somebody in. I'm actually a victim of that to a great degree. I mean, for me, I've had to find other ways to get into corporations and into jobs because I can't just go through HR because my resume is too eclectic for them.
Which is bizarre because now with, the school shootings and everything else and the teacher shortages, they're like, "Hey, are you, ex-military? Are you, not in law were you in law enforcement? You wanna come in and teach?" Like, okay, so that's okay, but we can't take the eclectic education of yourself and put you in a classroom, for kids to thrive.
Yeah, it's just strange, isn't it? Go
Mhm.
figure. Also, I don't have a degree, a college degree, because I left college when I realized that I wasn't learning anything. And understand, I was paying for my own college, so you had to look at it and go, "Am I going to lay out another round of cash here for something I'm getting nothing from?"
Well, and what's interesting about what you're saying there, I'm in I am of 2 minds on this, maybe even 3. One is for those of us that have gone through and, you know, went through the rigor of education and got our degrees, there should be something for that. So whether that's a stipend or a bonus or whatever the case may be. Now that could create its own issues because then it's like, well, why would I hire you if I can hire Mark at a cheaper scale and get the same thing or maybe better? Let's put that aside, right? The other thing is in a lot of industries now, you see a lot of change where it's like, hey, you know what? We're not so much hung up on your education as we are on your lived experience, right? Like that's more important. Can you understand the pedagogy of teaching to someone and having them learn? And then what experience do you bring to bear on that particular subject, right? And there are programs that are saying, hey, you know what? Come on in and we will give you the skills as you teach. So there are programs out there that are like that.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if schools offered lived experience as well as education in the traditional subjects?
Yeah, I think that would be I think that could be beneficial for sure. But I also do think that there needs to be some oversight in regards to what are the outcomes that you want the kids to learn, right? At the end of it, I do believe in testing. I think that's important. I know some folks don't believe in testing, but there has to be some kind of way to assess that, kids or adults are learning what the intent is.
As strange as it may seem, I actually agree with you on that subject. I just think that the question is what kind of testing are we looking for, and if it's a corporate book based on the textbook and our current process, I disagree with that. I think tests should be given based on the information learned, not the process to learn the information. And for that, I think that we need relationship and human engagement. But yeah, kids should absolutely know how to read, write, do math, and understand how math relates to the world. You and I've
Mhm.
had that conversation, and we are in agreement on that. And
Well,
so
here
I think that you
again,
need to test on that.
there are lots of ways to assess learning, right? It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be a traditional paper pencil test, multiple choice, essay, yada yada yada. There are, and this is just kind of my experience at the college. I've seen, professors use oral exams versus a written exam. If the person could demonstrate their learning in that way, they have a testing center in there that's really great where some folks, suffer from, extreme anxiety because now you got to show what you know. They're great all quarter long, right? They know their stuff. They're a great student when they can take their time, but now it's like, here's the stakes. You got 90 minutes to do this. Can you do it? And they freeze up so they can go to the testing center and get extra time to take the test and use some of the resources, things like there's some really cool things
There
that
are different
have been
ways we
going
can
on
do it. There are ways we can look at it and ways we can do it that would be different.
for sure.
And it's actually part of it is how you ask the questions. I remember reading some of the questions in my test and going, "The hell are these people talking about?" And I'm like going, I don't remember anything along this line. And then you go, the train went this way for this long and went back this way for that long. And you got a cone of ice cream in the middle there. What's the sum of? And I'm like going, what? Who the hell
Well,
wrote this question and what does it actually relate to? And how will I ever use that in life?
right.
And
So,
then I do the calculation.
so what I did when I was teaching at the college, one of the courses I taught was business math. And, yeah, in some of the textbook math, it's pretty dry, right? And many of the examples are like, I have no interest in this. So I would change the problems, and I would think about holidays that I would spend in my office. I would have a coffee maker in there, right? And so it's like, all right, students, they come in, they have a cup of coffee. I'll have soft music playing, because I'm an advisor, and it's already a stressful situation. Folks are telling me what's going on, whatnot. And it's like, all right, so should I keep this coffee pot or should I go to the Keurig? And then we could do things based on cost and whatnot. Based
Landfill.
on the coffee, right? The rims that I have on my car, I bought them for a birthday present while I was still teaching at the college, and so we made that a math assignment that talked about, the objectives that we were trying to learn for that chapter. So now they're really into it, right? And so you can do those things where you can engage learning, and so I love
So why
instructors
don't
that are
we?
able to do that.
Next question. Why don't we?
Some do. I just I think not
Teachers
everyone
are
does.
the saving grace. Teachers are the saving grace of an education system that's failing us as a whole.
Hmm.
This is go back to what we started with. Teachers are the saving grace.
Well, in college is a little bit different, right? We have a little bit more protections as far as our academic freedom. We can teach and with a lot more flexibility, as long as we're still teaching the objectives and all the yada yada yada. I think in grade school and high school might be a little bit more strict in terms of the rail they have to ride in how they teach. And to that end too, now it's also gotten very polarizing, right? So,
Yeah.
you have, folks that are, teaching slavery and doing mock slavery things and having, black kids wearing harnesses or on the ground where white kids are standing on top of them and doing slave auctions. And I mean, these things are happening in 2022. So there's academic freedom and then there's what the hell is this?
Does that fall under sports or economics
No, this was history.
or social studies? So it's under
Yeah,
social
I don't
studies.
know. But I mean,
Yeah.
there's no rationale to say, "Hey, this is how we're gonna teach this."
There, again, we have to have the community involved in the development of the education system to some degree. It cannot be a one size fits none. And while some of the ideas are interesting, somebody has to sanity check the ideas and
Yeah,
say,
for
so
sure.
what's your goal and how are we going to do this so that people learn and don't get offended? So I was having this conversation with Terry yesterday, and I said, one of the things that annoys me a lot, and I try not to get too annoyed by things because there's so much, but what annoys me a lot is people who take time out of context. One of
Mm,
my favorite subjects about this is, because Henry Ford was a misogynist, a racist, an industrialist, and all of these horrible things, nothing he ever did is worth talking about or noting or learning about. You write everything off because he was all of these bad things.
so
But
we
you
should we
don't
say
put it,
that about Hitler?
yeah, that too. But you put it in context of the time that Henry Ford lived and not measure him by our standards in our time and not look at everything the man did because human beings are multiple things. We aren't all black, white, evil, good. We aren't all one thing or another. We're everything. So there are things to learn from different things. We can certainly learn from what Hitler did, but did you know he loved dogs and he was actually quite a good painter from what I remember reading. But he was a heinous human being. Just saying that,
So what you're
and
saying is, you
you,
know,
you you don't
look at
judge
things
people by you.
So the way I'm digesting it is I can say, "Hey, this was a horrible man, right?
Mhm.
Who killed millions of people. Um, but his
Including some of my
war
relatives, I will point out.
to say his war strategy was good." Or we could talk about the North Atlantic trade, slave trade, right? And talk about the capitalism of that. Just looking at it purely from economics and not from the atrocity, right? So
But
you're
again,
saying being
but
able
again,
to
you're
separate those things out.
but again, what I'm saying is each person needs to be looked at within the context of where they are at that point. And yes, they have done heinous things. And you're talking about more of a globalized situation. When I'm talking
Mhm.
about Henry Ford, I look at the things that he did that were positive. I mean, there's something. Some of his sayings were inspiring and well thought out. On the whole, the guy was awful, but he also invented industrialization. He also paid his workers a living wage. So don't write out, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Look at everything within context, is what I'm saying. Don't
No,
be
no,
ready. Life is really a switch that you flip.
but I think there's a responsibility on both sides, right? From the
Yeah.
teacher and the student. And so what happens is, let's say you're talking about Henry Ford, right? So if you have a conversation with me, you're like, "Oh, Henry Ford was great because yada 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 yada," right? My own, you're I'm not getting the context of I'm just talking about this thing. You can almost just take the name away from him. There was a
Mhm.
man who espoused these things, which was great. Here was a man who redefined, the automotive industry. That's all we're looking at. We're not looking at
Mhm.
these things over here. But typically, what happens is folks deify, these folks, and then they teach from that standpoint. Well, this person was great, and no, now I can't parse it because you haven't parsed it. You know what I mean?
So, yeah, man, and here we are, tools of idiocy again. As we come back to it, I haven't met any deities in my life. Have you?
Every time I look in the mirror.
Oh well, okay, given that's a given. But in my life, I haven't met too many deities, so I tend to look at people like people. I tend to judge people by who they are and what they are, and I try really hard not to be judgmental. I really try hard not to judge people by me and my outlook.
But this is your enlightened state, right? You are very uniquely you. I don't think a lot of people share that particular sentiment. And we are taught not to operate that way, right? We're told
Thank you so
to
much.
deify the LeBrons and the Elon Musk and the et cetera, et
We
ceteras.
we are taught how.
Mhm.
We are taught how to deify these people.
Mhm.
And you and I have had this conversation lots of times. I have no desire to be the leader of this movement because if I am and I get deified as the leader of the movement will fail. My interest is in the movement succeeding. If there's a single point of failure because I'm leading it and people aren't stepping up to be them bring themselves to the table and create community and become leaders in and of themselves, the movement will fail. And all we have to do is look back at history to see how often that happens.
Mhm.
This what we're talking about every week will fail if we suddenly deify somebody and expect them to lead the charge. Barack Obama, when he was first elected, was saying, "Yes, we can," and I actually voted for him because that was the right message. What people heard is, "Yes, you can," and expected him as the president of the United States to do all the work for them when we can't make any changes without all of us participating.
Yeah. And it is election time, and down ballot voting is tremendously important. Um
It is at that.
You know, don't know what the choices are, and we wouldn't even presume to tell you who to vote for or if you even should vote, because not
Well,
voting is actually a vote. It could be a vote of protest, right? Uh, but if you do decide to vote someone in, then you need to support them on the other side. Because once they get there, you can let them, you know, just kind of hang out there and fight against the institution, and they're only going to be so effective, fighting the war. Um, After they're elected, I think that's where the real work starts by we the people, and
Right.
that's where you get.
And we also have to, even if we didn't elect somebody, if that person's in office, we either have to support them or hold their feet to the fire.
Mhm.
Whatever it takes to get what we need to get done. And we can only do that together. And I will say again, I had a conversation not too long ago with a local politician, and I asked them if how many people they have a month that come in and ask for something or want something changed or that they can't do anything about. And he says they would need an accountant to come up with that number. And I
Mm.
said, so what happens if 1,000 people come in and ask for it? And said they'd have my full attention. We can only do it together, so we have to figure out how to make that happen. So, are you more afraid of working together than you are of the potential outcome for all of us?
Whew.
We're looking at some bad times coming, and we need to work together. So, how do we get there? I'm literally, quite honestly, at wit's end. I've tried to gather people through social media, get people to having conversations. We're doing this podcast. What's it going to take?
Well, we just have to, keep doing the work. If it was
Yep,
easy, it already have been done.
yep,
But one of the things we can do is, this Friday, we are going to be interviewing the candidate who is running for a representative here, Janelle Holst. She is the Republican candidate. That'll be Friday at 4 p.m. And then we will have the incumbent Tara Simmons on Saturday the 22nd at 4 p.m. So, this is what I'm talking about, right? Mark was saying, ask the tough questions. Come and ask those tough questions. Are they going to be the candidate for you? Does it resonate with what they're saying and what their platform is? And then, if they get elected, are you going to continue to support and push forward your objectives to make the change that you want to see? And I
yep,
think that's what happens. And this is
and
something different. I
yep,
mean, this time last year, I wasn't doing this. This time last year, well, Mark and I have been doing this for just over a year, but we weren't doing these things. So this is how that change looks. And you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, one day in front of the other, and all of a sudden you've got a year behind you. And then you
yep.
can see the changes, you can see the progress. So, yes.
And every time we do this, Marwan has a look on his face. Is how many episodes that we've done consecutively?
Well, I got to say, it's one of the most consistent things that I do, right? And that's very hard from a time management standpoint. I am behind on so many different things because I make so many promises to so many people that my self care is a laughable joke. I'll work on it at some point in time, right? It's like they say, well, you can get your rest when you're dead. You do need some rest now, so but.
Yes, you do.
Uh, there is a lot to do, and I feel like, for me, or I think that, my time is short, just kinda looking at the lifespan of in my demographic, right, and all the different things, and we're like you said, we should have been doing this work decades ago. And so we're way behind where we should be. And so this is me operating from a sense of urgency, right? So I'm trying to go as hard and as fast as I can because I know that we're out of time already. And we may not even be able to fix everything, even if we all woke up collectively tomorrow, because that's still going to take time. But you still have to try, right? I'm going to go out swinging.
Yep, that's the only way you can. So, given what you just said, I'm going to read a quote, and I will tell you where I stole this. I mean, I appropriated this quote from. Um, I actually got a chance to see the last James Bond movie with Daniel Craig, No
Hmm.
Time to Die. And I don't want to blow the ending from it, but this was a quote that was used at the end of the movie that I found incredibly appropriate. It's now it's on my screensaver. So the proper function of a man is to live, not to exist. I shall
Mm.
not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. Jack London. Marwan and I. This is Marwan and I trying to use our time. And one of the things I was thinking about is I was saying it's sometimes daunting when all you hear is crickets, and you reach out and you're pouring your heart out. You're reaching out to people. You're trying to get them to engage. And I suddenly had a thought today because I've been watching back episodes of West Wing. Is that we just need Aaron Sorkin to come write for us to get the messaging out because Aaron Sorkin has done some of the most amazing things and storylines. If I don't know if you've ever watched West Wing or The
Mm-mm.
Newsroom or any of the series that he's been associated with, but he has the ability to tell a story that shows you what could be. The beauty of The West Wing, which by the way I'm going to pitch saying it's on HBO Max now. It used to be on Netflix. Um, the beauty of West Wing is it shows you what democracy could look like if you had people who were not quite so jaded as they are now representing you. And it shows the aspects of politics and global interactions in a way that nothing else does. And it certainly creates more questions and more questions as you look at our representation and our politicians and what this fictitious presidency of 8 years of President Bartlett looks like. But it's very interesting. And the newsroom takes the same look at media as the West Wing took at politics. So Aaron Sorkin tells really good stories about what things could look like and what happens when you actually ask the questions and look for answers. So
Question, you know, you brought up media. Is would do you identify any media outlet or program, singular, that just reports the news without a biased slant?
the Guardian. Actually, if you look at Ad Media, which is a I don't even know what they are, but they put out a map about where media stations land on liberal to conservative, and they're
Mhm.
pretty accurate. But I read The Hill, I read The Guardian, I will occasionally read the New York Times. I have stopped reading the Washington Post since Bezos took it over because it's absolutely changed its focus. I read the Los Angeles Times, the Chicago Tribune, and I used to read the Boston Globe, but it's not quite what it used to be either. But the Guardian is my go-to. I also use Huffington Post, because they aggregate a lot of news stories from a lot of
Are
different
there
sources.
are there or do any of those that you just named provide like dueling perspectives? Like, hey, we're gonna talk about I don't know what happened in Ukraine today. You know, with the assault uh from Russia that happened, and have a left perspective, a right perspective, and just this is what happened.
Yeah, they give you the ones I read would give you as close to straight news as you can get.
Hmm.
And but if I read, let's say I read The Hill, which is a fairly right leaning paper, but not extremely right, and I read The Guardian. Between the two of them, I get two different angles of it to give me to look at. If I want analysis of something, I go watch Bo because he'll break it down. I do not watch, by the way, I did fair disclaimer, I do not watch TV media. I don't care about infotainment. I don't care about CBS, MSNBC. I don't want to see a talking head. I want to read it for myself.
Yeah, but even reading it from yourself is can be
Um,
politically
that's why,
biased.
well, that's why I read several sources. It gives me
Mhm.
different angles, but it's really my responsibility to parse the information in as true a form as I can. And one of the tools of idiocy is not asking the questions or holding an opinion without data.
Well, I'm gonna do a show about how data is used to tell the story they wanna tell and not the story
Lies,
that
damn lies, and
truly
statistics.
is.
Yeah, I mean, it really is out there. And
Mhm.
if you keep asking questions, you'll soon see what is bullshit and what is conspiracy and what is real. You may not get all the way to the foundation of real, but if you keep asking questions, things fall apart quickly, and you'll be able to see what the real information is. And
And I
I
think
ask
that's
lots
one
of
of the
questions.
great tricks, right? That's one of the great tricks
Yeah.
is we're so busy and inundated with survival that it's like, okay, okay, so I'm supposed to go and try to research this and find the data, find the statistics, be able to parse out when they're trying to use these numbers to tell me this versus that, or listening or reading a news article and saying, hey, is this opinion or is this just stating the fact?
The biggest problem we
It's
have
difficult.
is we have been so indoctrinated that we'll believe what somebody says without ever asking the next question or looking anywhere near anywhere else for it. I hear people say some of the dumbest things I have on the planet, and I look at them and go, "Really?" And again, going back to the Facebook, the Facebook article that Michael had said, and I started commenting on. I mean, it wasn't long before people were screaming socialist and communist and everything else. When Michael just said, "I want to see a living wage."
Mhm.
Well, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Work until you get there. Somebody tried to convince me that banks pay more now than when I was working for banks a long time ago, and I'm like, I just stopped the conversation. I just stopped having the conversation with them because, yeah, BS. And you can say things, but you better have some data to back it up. And I know that some credit unions pay quite well, but $18 an hour is not a starting wage. And people were trying to defend that, and I'm going, yeah, no, they're dealing with money. I want them to be able to be paid a wage where they don't have to worry about living. That is smart. That creates honesty and loyalty. But we don't care about that anymore, do we? We just care
Well,
about having people in the row and making the most money for the shareholders.
the golden parachute's gone now, right?
Yeah.
You're not in a space for 30 years anymore, 40 years. Not at the
Yep.
Ford factory, and retire from it.
It hasn't been around since 1980s. It changed way back then, and yet we still seem to believe that myth, or somebody does.
Lots of things to address. Well, this was definitely a banger episode. We're 4 minutes over time. So
Yep.
this was definitely enthralling and engaging. Great show.
Yep. And I look forward to having the conversation next week.
Absolutely. Any programming notes you want to leave folks with?
Just learn to ask the next question. Yeah, I am going to be canceling the workshop on Saturday. So the workshops will start at Sylvan Way Library on the 29th of the month. I need more time to build up and get people involved and engaged to show up. Um, but if you come, we will have this conversation in a way that will give you tools to get where you want to go.
Nice. Nice.
So, and we do it
Um,
for free. But you can write Marwan and gather together, grow together, check for $100 if you feel the need to pay for the class.
well, that's awesome. Well, my programming note will be the networking workshop breakfast, October 26th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. at New Horizon. After this networking workshop, we'll go back to our regularly scheduled time, 11 a.m. So in the month of November, we're going to be our guest speaker will be from the Cayman Islands. It should be definitely a great discussion. We'll definitely put out some marketing materials as it gets closer to time, but it should be really good. So stay tuned for that. Again, Friday at 4. Catch us for our political series as we interview political candidates as it is election season. And go ahead with that final word there, sir.
Just wanted to say that because we're going to be talking about the oceans on the in November, we're going to go deep.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, that is the final word. So for Mark Boatwright-Frost, I am Marwan Cameron. This is Tipping Points and Puzzle Pieces. I got to give you a horn for that one. And we will see you, well, in 54 minutes for our housing conversation with KCR and Bremerton Housing Authority. All right, everyone. Have a good one.